Welcome to the MS Dev Show, episode number 192.
This is an episode in our special series recorded live from the Podcast Central at Build. We bring you the best guests for some of the best announcements. Raygun gives you complete visibility on errors, crashes, and performance problems affecting your end users. Replicate issues in seconds rather than digging through log files or having to rely on users to report errors or crashes. Raygun gives you a window into how users are really experiencing your software applications. Check it out today at raygun.com.
We're now with Tara Raj, Program Manager on the Windows Development Platform team, and Sarah Cooley, Program Manager on the Windows Kernel team. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about the Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL for short, in case we end up using that acronym throughout the show. But we did have an episode on it, but I think it was like a year ago. So I think we should start with a recap of what WSL is.
Okay, so WSL is a combination of kernel mode components and a user mode helper tool that basically takes stuff coming out of Linux and converts it to something that the Windows NT kernel understands. So what this effectively means, if you're somebody running WSL, is you can run Linux apps, binaries, like the Linux, and you can run any Linux tool that you'd like to run on Windows without having to do anything to support it. So you enable the feature, you download your favorite Linux flavor of choice, and then you can run any tool available in that distribution, from apt-get to ls to pwd to whatever you need to run. You can run it. Cowsay, Fortune, Yancat. The important
Some of our favorite demos.
This is all the things I'm sure you're running. So, I just want to make it clear to everybody, because this is like the inevitable questions are like, oh, so is this emulation? Is this Hyper-V? Like, what the heck is this? But it's actually natively running on there. Like, the demo that I always give to people, and we were talking about this before the show, is like, I just open it and I show people that it opens in like a half second, and then I close it, I open it, and we go into like Task Manager and look at, Hyper-V is not running. Like, it just, everything is actually running, and these are like unchanged Linux binaries. So it really is, you've created magic, is the short version of it.
Yeah. So, really what it effectively means is your command prompt now includes everything available in a Linux distribution.
Yep. Which is super awesome.
So what's new in over the past year since we've last had an episode on this that would be interesting for us to hear about?
Yeah, one of the big things is that you can actually get distributions from the store now. So we have 5 distributions available. We have Ubuntu, 2 versions of SUSE. So we have SUSE, OpenSUSE, and Wsl Is. We have Debian and Kali Linux. And the latter of those 2 are fairly new. They came out in the past month. And you can actually run these side by side, which is another interesting thing. So not only do you get them from the store,
So what do you have to do to like switch between OSs?
Yeah, so one thing that we have is a configuration tool where you set your default distro. And then basically what you can say is, for example, if you're in your command prompt and you want to launch Ubuntu, you say ubuntu.exe. And then you're launching Ubuntu. You want to launch Debian, you exit out and say debian.exe, and you have Debian going. It's just as simple as that.
So then if you just have like multiple windows open, you could have, that's how you get them side by side. So you have one command line on one side, one on the other, and
so that's definitely one option.
Yep.
So you can actually have different windows open where one of them is running Debian, one's running Ubuntu, etc. You can also use them all on the same command line. So one of my favorite demos to run is actually something like Debian run Fortune and pipe the output from that to Ubuntu run Cowsay. So you have Cowsaying
that's really
the
cool.
Fortune that came out of Debian. Kind of a trivial example, but you can actually mix and match them on the same command prompt. We talk about WSL a lot, so you do have a default OS or so default distribution that you can run. And the handy thing about that is most Linux distributions will have a core set of tools that's similar. So if you write a script and you use WSL grep, string, then whether that person consuming your script is running Ubuntu or Debian or even Kali or one of the other distros, it probably has grep. So that way you can create a more portable script that's a little bit more distribution agnostic.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting when somebody's like, well, what operating system are you running on that machine? It's like all of them.
Yep.
Oh, so you're using virtualization? Nope, I'm running all the operating systems natively, all at the same time. And I have them all talking to each other. So I remember at one point it was a little confusing because whenever we were talking to Rich, I think it was like around a year ago, we were talking about Bash on Windows, and then he was also saying, well, it's sort of like Windows Subsystem for Linux, which is like about as confusing, but it's basically been rebranded from Bash to WSL. So what was the reason for the rebranding?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. I'm glad you asked. But as we've moved to a more multi-distro environment, what's happened is that different distributions don't always run bin bash. So when we were running bash exe, what we were actually doing is launching the distribution and then literally running bin bash. But some distributions, so like right now we're talking to Alpine, run bin sh. And some users would prefer to run like Z shell or a different kind of shell emulator. So we hadn't quite realized when we first shipped how restrictive that was, but it turns out it was a little restrictive. Now we actually ask the distro which shell you'd like to use as your default experience, and we use that. So we've actually expanded beyond bash to Z shell and sh and ash and bash and anything you'd like to use.
Right, and that's why we felt that the Windows subsystem for Linux was a more appropriate long-term name.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So what's the story about the interoperability between Windows and these various versions of Linux? Because, I see like there's some things that like as a developer, like I don't want to set like twice on all of these things. Like I might have environment variables, I might have like my host file, and even like the
Well, just getting files around.
just like the file system itself. How does that handled on WSL?
Yeah, so I guess I can take the environment variable side of this, and then Sarah will jump into the file system. So we actually released an environment variable tool, or an environment variable that you can have called WSL env. And it allows you to do just what you're saying. You can specify what you want to move across between Windows and your WSL instance. And that environment variable, you essentially have just like a comma-separated value, for example, and you can specify what you'd like to move across. And
so is that like seamless. One way, like Windows to WSL, or is that like two way?
It's both ways.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we have a pile of other tools such as WSL Path, which does path conversions for you. And
so is that like I could like copy the path, like if I'm in Windows on a command prompt, I like just copy the path that I happen to be at and like paste it, but it pastes as Linux, or how does that work?
That's exactly how it works for you. Yeah. And it's as long as you have WSL path configured that you'll have your slashes in the right direction that you'd like.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yep. So that's something that can really get you. As we're talking about interop here, you might not, you're blurring the lines between whether you're in Windows or Linux. So here you don't need to remember which side you're in. It just converts those paths for you.
So like, if I'm in like /users/Carl, it'll like when it pastes, it'll be like /usr or /bin /usr/Carl or something like that.
You do need to run it through the WSL path tool. So if you're running in Ubuntu or Debian, we actually inject WSL path as our own custom, I hesitate to say binary, but it's our own application. So you'd run WSL path on the command line, and then you'd paste your path into that, and the output you'd get would be properly formatted with the right slash directions. And I'm going to take this opportunity to transition to file sharing. So since you are running a Linux instance and you want access to your Windows file system, we've actually mounted your C drive under mount in your Linux environment. So the other thing that WSL path does is it adds the mount C to your path. So if you take a Windows path from your Windows drive and you paste in, WSL path, and you want like your user directory documents or whatever, it'll also add the mount C prefix. So it'll be /mount C, user documents, etc. So.
That's very cool. And then one thing I did see in the keynote that I guess we didn't really chat about was Notepad has actually been updated to support Linux line endings
Yes.
as well.
That is one that we are very excited about.
Yeah.
And it's actually the WSL layer that essentially helped make that possible.
Oh, okay.
And so, yes, Notepad does now support Linux line endings. And for people who have run into that issue before, it's a pretty big blocker when you have everything just as one messy string. So now you can have your files in a sane-looking way.
So for people who want to open up logs on Notepad or who entered something in Vim,
Exactly.
now you can open that in Notepad and it'll all look right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to go back because I think one of the things I asked about, I saw a demo of, I just want to make sure our users understand this too. I mentioned the host file. So I saw somebody, they made a custom entry in the Windows host file and restarted the WSL for their distro, and it was just there. And as a developer, a lot of times you might want to be doing weird things on your local dev box, and that just makes it so easy to keep it sane when you're working in the multi-operating system environment like that.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
I wish I had more to add, but yeah, no, that's the Windows thing.
It sounds like a neat demo, yeah.
No, you got it. That's exactly what happened.
Well, and it sort of gets us back to the root too of why. I mean, one of the main drivers why any of this functionality exists. I mean, it's for developers, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's funny that we're shocked, wow, all these features you're adding make life easier for developers. Well, yeah, that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah. There are a ton of choices right now. So for me, the Cliff Notes version of why WSL is amazing is at least monthly I'll be really excited about something I read on the internet, and I'll go pick up the documentation, and it might be written in a Linux first or Linux forward way. And it's so frustrating when you can't run that. So to me, WSL just gives people the ability to run anything regardless of how they stumbled upon it and what instructions they got or what they're comfortable in.
I agree.
You can run it.
I can't remember what the tool was, but I ran into something like that too. Mm-hmm. I can't remember exactly what the tool was, but sure enough, I found a Linux one, and I'm just I wish I could. Wait a second, I can run that because
sudo apt-get.
Yeah, exactly. I pulled it down, ran it, and it worked great.
Yeah, and in addition to that, the star of the show for WSL is really this interoperability and the fact that there really are no bounds. If you do want bounds and want to have something that is very isolated, then you have a VM for that. So this is a very lightweight way to go back and forth between your Linux and your Windows system, and it just makes development so much easier.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, really quickly before we get off of integration. So talking about blurring the bounds between Windows and Linux. Mm-hmm. So we talked about how you can Debian run, Fortune, pipe, cowsay. You can actually do that between Windows processes. So we actually share your Windows path into WSL. So you can run PowerShell exe from your Linux environment too. And you can mix and match. So if you want to, the demo I like using, I love VM. So I can only run get VM in PowerShell, but if I want to be running in my bash prompt, I can run PowerShell get VM, and I can still use pipe and redirect and tail and whatever else I want to run. So I can run PowerShell, get VM, pipe, grep Ubuntu, and get all of my Ubuntu VMs. It's amazing.
We had Jeffrey Snover on, and I think he was talking about something like that. He had some convoluted demo where he's connecting 5 different machines, and he's piping everything around across the different operating systems. And I mean, I love it. It's pretty wild. I mean, it used to be that Windows was such a sandbox, so that's why this is so exciting.
Raygun provides full stack error, crash, and performance monitoring for tech teams. Whether you're a software engineer looking to diagnose and resolve issues with greater speed and accuracy, a product manager drowning in bug reports, or you're just concerned you're losing customers to poor quality online experiences, Raygun can provide you with the answers. Get full stack error and performance monitoring in one place. The next time you're struggling to replicate errors and performance issues in your codebase, think Raygun. Head over to raygun.com. Get up and running within minutes and dramatically improve the online experiences of your users.
So we were talking earlier about side loading and how you can just go and grab these different distros. But I saw something about bringing your own distro as well. So how do you side load your own?
So this is pretty exciting. This is something that we open sourced a project for a couple weeks ago. So hot off the presses, this is a project called the Distro Launcher. And so essentially what you can do is you can specify the tarball of a Linux distro that could be customized. It could be your favorite distro that we don't have in the store yet. And you essentially take that, you package it into an MSIX that is then packaged up similar to how a store application is. And then you pull that onto your local dev machine.
Okay.
And it acts as a store app would, and it runs right on top of WSL. It's the Linux user mode of whatever distribution it is that you've taken from the internet, right?
Okay. That's pretty
so
cool.
you can sideload that. And the other thing is that distro owners and maintainers can also take that MSIX and then submit it to the store. And we work with them throughout this process. So Sarah mentioned earlier that Alpine Linux is one of the distros that we're working with now.
Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. So you don't really have to necessarily even do anything. I mean, it could be, like you said, a new distro can come along. They can package it up, and then they can submit it to the store, and you can help them then actually make it available to everybody.
The Distro Launcher is essentially a template version of how you can do that. So we step you through the process of what it is you need to specify, a config file that, or manifest for that this example, that you need to go and change values for. And it's a pretty simple process. We have people spinning these up in about 15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, people actually use it for side loading, like truly custom OSs.
That's cool.
So what kind of reception has there been to WSL over its first year?
It's been great. It's been really exciting to see how well the Linux community is receiving this, and Windows and Linux users alike, especially people, for example, if you're at a company and you receive a Windows machine, but you're used to Linux tools, or your favorite tools are Linux tools, you can now just go and grab those and use them, and your development workflow really isn't disrupted in any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any roadmap that you can talk about?
More interrupt. So basically what we're going to be doing in the near future, and you're actually seeing some of this coming out in insider builds already, is we're going to be making it so that Linux processes are more on par with Windows processes. So, for example, we just released a change such that if you run a Linux process that needs to have access through the firewall, we now pop a fancy tooltip the way that you would for a Windows process.
Oh, okay.
So if you're running Python and you need to punch a hole through the firewall to be able to see your web app, or you're running Nginx or SSH server, now we'll pop a really nice, hey, do you want to allow SSH through your firewall? Things like that. They seem like little fit and finish type things, but it really changes the experience because we live in a weird world where Linux forward people don't always know how to interop with the Windows firewall. Yep. And Windows developers don't always understand what needs to happen.
That's actually a really good
Linux.
point.
Well, and not to mention, if there's one thing holding you back from using it, it's going to stop you from using it.
Yeah. It's just frustrating. And if you can't find the documentation online, or you don't know which thing to look up, you don't know whether you're looking up Windows or Linux instructions, it genuinely gets really confusing. So now Linux processes are in the task manager. You can see them in Procmon. They have IDs and they're discoverable. You can manage them. You can pass them through the firewall. And it's really pretty integrated. Also file system changes. So we just introduced folder level case sensitivity into NTFS. So it used to be interesting because you could create case sensitive. Yeah, but you used to be able to create case sensitive files in WSL, and then Windows would just pick whichever one it found first, which is not super desirable. Yeah. And NTFS has always had case sensitivity support, but now we surface it on a folder level. So that's been interesting. Stuff like that, though, like little fit and finish interop things and deep integration into tools like VS Code. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this morning there was an announcement that was essentially about making it easier to set up your machine. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it kind of fits in with your teams?
Yeah, so the project itself is for developer setup scripts. So you get a new machine, you probably spend half a day setting this thing up, and our team is just frustrated with that. And so we saw different projects that are out there, particularly Box Starter and Chocolatey, and we're like, what if we could get these things together and get a script that gives you a one-click install that you can run in just a few minutes. Go grab coffee, you come back, and your developer box is set up. And so that's essentially the goal of this project. Mm-hmm. And so the role that WSL plays in that is we have a web dev setup script. And so we've essentially put a 3-line script that allows you to install WSL from the command line. So you can actually script your install of this thing now.
So that not only will get WSL and your distro of choice on your box, but in a complete development environment so I can get going on my web framework of choice.
Yeah. So you can get Node along with this, Hyper-V, it gets a pile of things and uses Chocolatey to help you go and get that. And the way in which it's a one-click install is through Box Starter.
That's awesome.
Yes, I want to use that.
I mean, Jason and I are really big fans. We already have box starter scripts that go back, probably 8-9 years, and it's really cool to see that being not only evolved but integrated in through this. Because when you think about it, it's like this is a tool that's automating not only the installation of applications, but it's pulling it from the store, it's sending it commands. And then inside of that sandbox, it's setting up more stuff. So it seems like it's something that was going to save just a ton of time.
Yeah, and I mean, the level we want to take it to is, one side of it is being able to install WSL. The next level is being able to install tools on WSL.
Yeah.
So that's really where we want to take this thing.
Very cool. Anything else that you guys are dying to tell us about all of this?
Oh, man. Really nerdy detail, so I have no idea if people are going to take us up on this. But one of the things I'm most excited about actually is what we've now introduced AF Unix to Windows. So not directly WSL related, but Linux since the dawn of time has used AF Unix, so socket address family, for inter-process communication.
Just going to keep nodding.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm an operating systems nerd, so this had to come out. But
I love it. It's awesome.
but Linux since the dawn of time has used AF Unix for inter-process communication. We actually just brought AF Unix to Windows, so you can use AF Unix between Windows processes, which is great if you're moving a app or a program over from Linux land to Windows land. But the other thing you can do is communicate between a process on WSL and Windows. So now you have this really rich opportunity to create really native experiences that cross Windows and Linux. So you have a piece of software that genuinely takes dependencies on things in both worlds. This is brand new, so nobody's really used it yet, which is why I wanted to talk about it and why I'm excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I keep waiting to see what people build with these tools. We're building a lot of platform stuff.
Yeah, because there's libraries like that are available on Linux, obviously, and there's the same thing that happens on Windows. So if you have one library on each, so this would let you sort of combine those things.
Yeah, it's basically a truly cross-platform application that it has elements of Windows and Linux in it.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. But there's a lot of applause in the background.
I know, right?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And we're not even live.
Yeah, I knew it was cool. Told you. No.
So, how would you even distribute an app like that then?
You could take a dependency on the Windows Store. Like, we have ways to communicate what things you require in order to run something. So I'm sure we'd figure it out. Put it this way. If the problem we have is figuring out how to mark that dependency, in my view, we've won.
Yeah.
So it gives us a lot of freedom to do interesting things within Microsoft. And it's obviously out in the public, so other people could also use this. But yeah, we're going to have to solve a lot of problems like that as we go. So
I can just imagine the user step 1, install Windows. Step 2, install Linux.
Yeah.
It's like step 3, install this
profit.
application.
And if you use our box starter script, that's exactly what it is.
yeah.
Okay, anything else?
I think that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah, we're excited for the future of this thing.
To be clear, is plenty, by the way, because it's so
there's
cool.
a lot of new stuff.
And it just feels like you're like removing a lot of the rough edges too. When I first used this when it came out, it was like, oh, don't use this, don't touch this, don't do this, it'll blow up. And now, use it and you just expect things to work the first time. Like we're to that point now, which is great.
Yep. In fact, that's a really interesting point. So for people out there listening and also for you guys, we're to the point where we really want feedback about where those rough edges are. Like, we fixed enough things that we knew are wrong that now we really do need to know, hey, what was your expectation when you ran that? Like, when you started that daemon, did you expect it to close when you closed the window? When you started your machine? There are so many weird aspects to running a full operating system as an app on another operating system that genuinely we want to see how people are using this. And we think that it's hardened enough that we really do need that feedback about expectations. And
I heard you.
How do we get feedback to you?
Great. So there are two main ways. So if you have a feature suggestion, we have a pile of feedback in user voice, and that's nice because you can upvote things that are already in there. So we have some idea of volume. If you have a bug, we do have a GitHub issue tracker that's like aka.ms, like WSL issues.
Yep.
So.
Okay.
Yep.
Very cool. So where can people find you guys? So Sarah, where can people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm virtual Cooley on Twitter. So
Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
That's awesome. And Tara, where can people find you?
Also on Twitter, Tara_MSFT.
Okay, that is awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here and talking about the Windows subsystem for Linux and all the coolness that goes along with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.